Okay, when I think of women in history and all the progress we've made, I think of one thing, and that is Title IX. Title IX is a law that requires gender equity for boys and girls in an educational setting, which includes athletics, and that's a passion of mine. I grew up in a world where girls didn't play sports. Girls couldn't play sports. There weren't any teams for girls. And so in 1972, when Title IX was passed, it was a big thing for me personally. I love sports, and when I couldn't play, I didn't question it. I questioned why I was a girl. I wish I was born a boy because boys could play sports. I didn't question why we didn't have a team. All the boys in my class were playing basketball, were playing baseball, and I wasn't allowed to play any of that. And I never questioned it. The boys in my class would sit there in English or math, and they would talk about basketball practice, and they would complain about it, and I would have given anything to play basketball. They would talk about their road trips, they talk about their games, their uniforms that they were given, and I lived through them. It was so exciting for me to listen to them and the way they got to play sports. I was jealous. My parents would take me to games and I would just marvel just watching the boys play sports. I would have given my eye teeth to play sports. So when I got to high school, I finally got to play on a team. I was a freshman on the junior varsity, and my boy classmates were on the boy junior varsity, and we were all comparing stories, and it was finally there that I got to play basketball. The boys got their uniforms a couple days before we did, and we were black and gold. We were the Huskies, and they showed me their jerseys, big Huskies across the chest with a big number, and the cool jerseys and the really short shorts back in the day, but that's what boys wore. And so we had jerseys, and I was excited. I couldn't wait for the day when the girls got theirs. So it became the day that we handed out girls' jerseys, and our coach said, go in the locker room and get your PE uniforms because those will be your jerseys. And I couldn't believe that because the boys didn't wear their PE jerseys. They wore basketball jerseys. We were black and gold, and our PE uniforms were blue. But that didn't matter because that's what girls wore. So our coach had us get out our polyester blue pants and our blue and white tops, keeping in mind we were black and gold. And our coach said, if you are playing on the team, I will go out and buy iron-on numbers, and I will iron them on your left chest, and you will now have a jersey. And I was so excited because I got to have a number. I didn't question that we were blue, didn't question that it didn't say our name across the jersey. I was excited that I got to have a uniform. And so they ironed the numbers on, and they gave me my PE uniform, and I was ready to play. Our boys had wristbands. I wanted a wristband. It's funny because now I don't let my players wear wristbands, but I wanted a wristband really bad, so I went to the coach and I said, can I have a wristband like the boys? And our coach said, no, that's for boys only. So I went into my drawer and I pulled out a pair of those long tube socks, and I cut off the tops of them. They had black and gold stripes on them, put them on my wrist, and I made my own wristbands so I could be like the boys. And I was, and I played, and it was fun. We didn't play as many games as the boys. We didn't travel as far as the boys. We played 6-minute quarters, and our boys played 8. It was not equitable at all, but I didn't care because I got to play and I didn't know any better. And right about then, Title IX was happening and schools had to comply. And so when I became a sophomore, the very first girls' state tournament in Idaho was created by 2 women in Moscow, Idaho. They just created it. They threw Title IX at the state, and the state agreed to have the very first Idaho girls' state tournament. The only problem was they didn't care, the state didn't care if you were little or big. They would allow 4 teams to go. And so being a little school, we were beat out by the larger schools and didn't make it. When I was a junior, it became more equitable because of Title IX, and we got to have teams from every small schools, bigger, and the large school, had their own state tournaments. It was still only 4 teams. And then when I was a senior, was the very first real Idaho state tournament that was equitable with the boys. I happened to play in it. We won the state title that year. It was very memorable for me. It was in Lewiston High School in a packed gym with a standing room only crowd with a line that went into the parking lot. That's the amount of people that wanted to pay to watch girls basketball. And so I realized that Title IX had really done something for athletics, and that's all I cared about. Now I'm a coach. We have to comply at Walla Walla Community College. Our athletic director has to do a report every year to make sure that we are in compliance with Title IX, and if we aren't, we get penalized. And so that did a lot for me personally. It did a lot for all the women my age. And the lady that I look to, who was the one major factor in getting Title IX passed, was a lady named Patsy Mink. She's known as the mother of Title IX. She's the one who got Richard Nixon to sign it into law, June 23rd, 1972. If she was alive today, I would thank her, because she has probably had no idea the impact of what she did, the impact on women, and what it would do for us now and even back then in my years. The year after Title IX was passed, in 1973, a lady who was a real champion for women's sports, Billie Jean King, she came onto the scene, and those of us who grew up in that era would know who she is. She had the famous tennis match with Bobby Riggs. She challenged him to a match and she beat him, and she beat him quite handily. And tennis people will point at Billie Jean King and say she's the reason that women's tennis was on the rise. Serena Williams is one of the female tennis players who will say, I give all my credit to Billie Jean King. A couple years ago, she won the Women's US Open, and she brought home $2.6 million, which is the exact same amount as the men's winner. And years ago, that would have never happened. But because of Billie Jean King, women in tennis are totally equal to men in tennis. It's because of her. I look at my sport, college basketball, and the one woman who we all point to in college women's basketball is Pat Summitt. Pat Summitt was the pioneer. She coached for 38 years. She finally retired a couple of years ago. She is the winningest college basketball coach, men or women, in the history of the sport. And Pat Summitt fought Tennessee because their men traveled in buses all over the United States, paid for, to play basketball games. They wouldn't pay for Tennessee to play. So Pat piled all of her players in a van, and she drove them places. She put sleeping bags in the van, and she made sure they could sleep in other teams' gyms, because she wanted to play back-to-back games, which women didn't do back then. But Pat made sure that you could go on a road trip and play back-to-back games as long as she could take care of the staying, which was something that Tennessee didn't pay for. So they stayed overnight on gyms. Pat washed all the uniforms. There was a weekend she tells about where they played 3 games in a row and there wasn't a laundry facility, so the girls played in dirty, sweaty uniforms. But that's what she went to, the extreme she went to put Tennessee women's basketball on the map. And now I'm proud to say that men's and women's college basketball is equal. The same 64-team NCAA tournament is played on the women's side, that is played on the men's side, and has been played on the men's side for years. It's the same. The TV coverage is the same. The money is not quite there yet, but with some it is. Pat Summitt did so much for women's basketball, and I am eternally grateful for her. Every sport can point at someone and say, she is the pioneer. She's the one who did everything. And I will tell a quick story about the Boston Marathon. There's a lady named Kathy Schweitzer. She was the first woman to run in and complete the Boston Marathon. And it's funny because if you don't know that story, you won't know that she had to write a fake name on her entry form to get in. She got in, and people didn't notice her because it was snowing and there were thousands and thousands of people there, and she got through the checkpoint, and about 4 miles down the road, media, television people recognized that there was a woman running the Boston Marathon, and they were appalled. And they got the director and they drove him 4 miles down the road, and he jumped off of the pickup he was in, and he tried to push her off the course. And one of the men she was running with punched him, and he was down for the count, and she finished the Boston Marathon. And ever since that day, women have been able to run in the Boston Marathon because of a lady named Kathy Schweitzer. So everybody did something for sports, but for me, Patsy Mink passing Title IX was the biggest thing that ever happened to me. And I look back today and I think, did I really want to be a boy? No. I'm happy that I'm a woman. I'm happy that I'm a female. Back then I wanted to be a boy in the worst way. But because Title IX came along, I'm happy that I'm a woman, and I realized that Title IX came on exactly at the right time for me. Thank you.